Okay. Good afternoon. How's everybody doing? Excellent. I have the distinct privilege of giving a 4 o'clock presentation, which means that there is another presentation after this. So I want to make sure that we are still energized and ready to go for the next one. But I also know that I am now one of the obstacles between you and happy hour. And I know that's a known thing, especially when it comes to Trailblazers. So just out of curiosity, how many of you have more than 10 badges? Okay, so we're going to go through kind of a war of attrition real quick. So 10, okay, who has more than 20? More than 30? 40? I'm teaching my 6-year-old how to count by 10, so I'm really good at this too. 60, 70, 80, 90, 100, 150. That's pretty impressive. That shows real dedication, and we definitely appreciate that level of intensity when it comes to learning about Salesforce. We're equally, I'd say, when I say this with love and affection, geeky and nerdy about how cool Salesforce is too, which is one of the reasons I really like getting up here and talking about all the things that we build. And so let's do that. So this is called the Future of Salesforce Security and Authentication, aka otherwise known as how to add the security that your users will love. And when we're talking about users, I'm talking about you, I'm talking about your employees, I'm talking about your customers. Right? We want to create an environment whereby everybody wants to opt in and all the data gets protected as well as we possibly can. But before we get to the good stuff, one of my favorite slides, we have to talk about it real quick. It's the forward-looking statement. I will read every 200th word. So the risks and features. I think that about covers it. The purpose of this slide is, again, we are a publicly traded company. I will definitely talk about things that are not commercially available today. Do not make your buying decisions based on things that are not generally available, please. All right, so let's get to it. My name's Josh. We'll talk a little bit more about me in a second, but there are 3 things I really want you to take away from today's presentation. The first is that we, my team, Salesforce in general, wants to enable you to protect your customers' data. Just out of curiosity, how many of you are admins within a Salesforce org? Okay, a good number of you. How many of you are admin tangent or admin adjacent? If nobody knows what those words mean, it's totally cool. I just made them up. But what we want to do is help you protect your customers' data, right? That's vital. We want to make sure your org is secure. We also want to make sure that you are empowered to allow and enable your employees to help protect your customers' data, right? It's not just enough that you're doing it. We want to make sure that your employees can do it as well, the other members of your organization. And then finally, what we'd like to do is walk through how we are moving through kind of the consumerization of this so that we can provide you the tools that increase the ability to adopt so that your customers can also opt in, adopt, and help secure their data and their organizations themselves. And so that's the premise of today. So it is widely accepted that two-factor authentication is the most effective way to protect an organization, to protect data, right? We know what multi-factor is, right? You've got 3 different buckets, something you know, something you have, something you are. And if you choose 2 of those things, it's a whole lot harder to potentially compromise the security of that specific org. So two-factor authentication traditionally is a username, password, and then something else, right? A top P, a fingerprint, some sort of two-factor authentication. That is the best way that you can secure your org. Now, that being said, I understand that being in security, like I've deployed two-factor authentication before, I've been in kind of that admin role. I know that it is, the word I think is thankless. It is a thankless job, right? It's a lot like being a goalie. And I'm not a rabid soccer fan, but I've watched enough hockey and soccer to understand that you can either be an attacker and you can get credit for when you 1% of the time get something through, and the 99% of the time when you actually fail, nobody really cares, versus a goalie who has to be essentially perfect all the time, and when they succeed, well, that was their job. And if they fail, oh, get that person out of there. They didn't do the one thing they were supposed to do, right? And that creates a really unfair situation for a soccer goalie, or any type of goalie as well. And that is a similar position that a lot of administrators and security professionals find themselves in. They're responsible for securing the entire Great Wall of China for every single possible nook and cranny, and only one small attacker or penetrator has to get through in order for their job to be rendered useless, right? So we know traditionally when it comes to protecting that goal, security professionals have typically been armed with the all-powerful password, right? Not necessarily the best way to protect that. Now, granted, you are standing behind it as well, so it is not just the password, but that is the tool that you are given to defend the goal. But what if it were not just you standing the goal? What if we could create the types of tools and resources that make it possible so that you're not the one who's there trying to deflect this themselves, but in fact it is you and somebody else, right? And that somebody else, to be fair, might not be me personally, right? But I want to help build the things and deploy the things that enable you to get other people to help you as well. So my name's Josh. If you ever need to get in touch with me, you can email me at josh@salesforce.com. I am the product manager of our mobile identity. I run certain products like Salesforce Authenticator, user linking service, authentication intelligence, and a few others. But really what it comes to, what really kind of gets my geek on, it's two-factor authentication, right? I came from Twofer, which was a Salesforce acquisition 3 years ago, and it was all about creating the best experience and the most secure situation using two-factor authentication. And so what we want to do is we want to help you protect your customers' data. But more specifically, we also want to enable you to have all the other resources available within Salesforce to do this as well. Remember, two-factor authentication at Salesforce, it's free. It's easy to turn on, and I will show you today that the user experience is actually really nice. In fact, I will dare challenge to say that once it's set up, the user experience of using two-factor authentication is no different than the user experience of not using two-factor authentication. Okay? I know that's potentially a bold claim, because many of you have had a RSA key fob before, and you would argue that no, there is a change in the user experience. But there are so many other resources, both across the stack and all the way down when it comes to the kind of infrastructure infrastructure cake slide that I like here. So many of these things are included within your licenses. Don't be afraid to dig in and see what other opportunities and resources you have available to you in your license to ensure that you are taking full advantage of all the resources of the infrastructure Salesforce puts forward for you. And I kind of look at this as my kind of the map in the mall, right? So, you are here with two-factor authentication. There's a laser pointer, but it's just so bright you can't actually see it. But, the you are here would be right next to like the Macy's and the Claire's. But two-factor authentication is just one of the many ways by which you can help protect your customers' data. But again, you protect your customers' data. What we want to do, though, is we want to help you help your employees also protect your customers' data, right? The best way we can potentially deploy two-factor authentication and increase security within an org is having more and more people using it. The best security solution in the world is not worth its salt if nobody's using it, right? So we need to get more people involved with it. And so what does this look like? Well, I mean, granted, again, I can't necessarily suspend the rules of MLS, but if you could imagine here that it would not just be you sitting in front of this goal helping to deflect potential attacks, but you could also include somebody else at the same time helping you tend goal. Right? That is the purpose of creating a highly usable and highly discoverable form of multi-factor authentication. And when I say discoverable and when I talk about behavior, let's get into really kind of what are the key drivers behind the issues within modern security. I typically bucket them into two buckets. I use both verb and noun at the same time. Don't do that. Does not make sense. So number one, if you have to change a user's behavior, this creates cognitive dissonance, right? Nobody really wants to change what they're doing unless you're going to pay them a phenomenal amount of money. But if you're saying, like, you still get the same vanilla access to your org, but now you have to do 2 or 3 more steps in order to get there, people do not like that. It causes dissonance, it causes lack of adoption. Lack of adoption causes lapse in security. We don't want that. We want something that effectively does not change a user experience. Additionally, if we really want widespread adoption, we have to make this thing discoverable, right? We can't hide it in the catacomb and expect somebody to go hunt for it. It needs to be widely available, easy to see, easy to onboard, easy to use, right? And so traditionally, there's been a paradigm within security that says, look, you can either have a really highly secure solution that is not usable, or you can have a super usable solution that's not really secure. Right? Like imagine taking something that's really precious and burying it 30 feet underground, putting cement on top of that, and then filling a pond with sharks with lasers on their heads, right? Like seems secure. Also, really hard to get to that really valuable thing at this point, versus it's just sitting there next to that shark that has no water, and it's just sitting there kind of flailing around, like easy to get to the thing, but not really secure, right? So this is kind of that paradigm that's been created. But I would argue that there's another axis as well, right? There's kind of this third dimension, if we're going to start talking about z-score here. If we're bringing it out into 3 space, and my clicker works, then there's also this idea of discoverability, right? And the more discoverable something is, what we're trying to do is essentially build a point that is highly secure, highly usable, and highly discoverable. If we can do all of those things, those should be the recipe to create a solution that helps onboard as many employees and customers to protect themselves. That's what we're really going for here. So what we do at Salesforce is we try and effectively bend the paradigm. We want to create a reality in which there's this green line that exists that allows us to simultaneously give ourselves a better security experience and a more usable experience, again, at the same time. And if we can do that, if we can imagine that there is in fact this solution out there, the thing that my team and I spend many hours a day trying to figure out how to do this as well as we possibly can, we also want to then grab that dot that's effectively sitting on that green line, and we want to pull it forward as quickly as possible and as aggressively as possible so that it exists over there essentially in 3 space. Now, to be fair, I also spend some of my time teaching financial derivatives and venture capital at the University of Texas, so when it comes to being really geeky about numbers and graphs, this is just so much fun. Okay, so enough with kind of the lecture. Let's get to the kind of the hands-on demo portion of this. I'd like to show you 2 things. The first is something that is readily available, something that you can turn on today. It costs you nothing. You can enable every single one of your orgs and every single person in every single one of your orgs to use it today if you choose to. But to be fair, there's no reason not to. And then I also want to show you something that is absolutely not generally available today with a very hard stop there. It is effectively still in our lab, but I think it's really cool, and it's potentially going to define some of the next generation types of user experiences you would discover within a 2-factor authentication experience. So see if you can pay attention and notice the difference between the one that is actually available today and one that is a demonstration that we've built as a prototype. All right, so first things first. This is an org, and this is my phone. Let's just make sure that my phone is going to key up all this stuff. There we go. Excellent. So let's log in. I've got 2-factor authentication, Salesforce Authenticator, the flagship experience already enabled on this account. Let's see what it looks like, right? Username, password, traditionally Salesforce authentication experience. You see that I'm instantly given a notification that something's going on. I touch the notification. What does it do for me? It tells me specifically that there is an action. Which action is that? There's a login that's taking on that specific web service. So there's a login to Salesforce on behalf of my identity from the Salesforce service, specifically attributed to this computer, defined by both the browser and the OS, and the ability to press approve or deny. I am now given all the information to make a very good decision very quickly. The only issue is, what if that's something I do every single day, right? I don't want to be bothered by the exact same login procedure every single day, because what that will very quickly train me to do is not really pay attention to it. So what we also offer is this concept of automation. So I can say, look, always do this from this location. And now I am, to be fair, subject to the location services available in the Moscone Center for this specific demo. But I'm going to go ahead and say, look, if I'm here the next time, go ahead and do the same action that I'm going to do now. So you can see here that I've pressed approve. Again, that single tap of that button allows me access to my org. I can choose to enroll in Lightning Login, which I encourage everybody to do. It's a wonderful, secure experience that gets rid of the password. But I'm not going to do this at the moment because that's kind of outside the scope of this specific demonstration. So what I'm going to do is the super anticlimactic thing of logging out now and showing you now what automation should look like. Again, what did we just do? We logged in using a username and password, and we had a 2-factor authentication experience. The notification was sent to my phone. My phone was the thing that I have, and all I had to do was hit yes. But I don't want to have to hit yes every single time, right? Because what happens the 8th time that happens? Pull my phone out, yeah, I know it's me. Pull my phone out, yeah, I know it's me. Eventually, somewhere way down the line, something important happens, and I stop paying attention. We don't want that. We only want you to be notified when something is critically important. So the things that are not critically important, things that are normal behaviors. If I log in from my computer every day and my phone is a proxy for my location, tells them that I'm in a normal location, then the phone should be able to respond for me automatically. All right, so let's see what live demos do here. I'm going to type in my username and password. I'm going to press submit here. I'm logging in. Location it does not look like it's going to work because it's now tracking my phone, my watch, but I can show you something really cool. You also have the ability just to press approve from your watch, right? And now I'm given instant access again as soon as the Bluetooth connects, and there we go. I don't know if I'm actually going to be able to get automation to work here just based on location services of the phone, but what I can tell you it does is effectively nothing. Right? The experience of it is you type in your username, password, you press submit, the request gets sent to the phone validates that, yes, this is a login happening on behalf of Salesforce for Josh's identity on this computer, and his phone is where it was the last time he said, okay, all those things are good. I'm going to go ahead and remit the signal back, and it's going to approve me automatically. It's going to be effectively invisible two-factor authentication, right? The user experience does not change, one-factor versus two-factor. There's no reason not to turn that on. There's no dissonance. It's very, very simple. And did I mention that it's free? I just want to make sure, because sometimes I know that can be like budgets, those are things, I understand that. This does not affect the budgets. Okay, so let's go ahead and show you something that does not exist in the real world today, but is also a really cool thing. So the idea behind this is what we have called in the past this thing called Halo. The idea is we've used in the first demonstration essentially the idea of this global sense of location, right? The phone is in this normal location defined by a lat and a lawn. But what about a local sense of proximity, right? Essentially a tying from a BLE standpoint between your phone and the browser. So to know that Josh is in a good location, but also what if Josh just gets up and walks away and uses the restroom, leaves his computer there, for some reason did not have the hindsight to actually log out of a session, so there could potentially be a vulnerability. Wouldn't it be nice if I got far enough away from my computer, I could instantly end any of my sessions, right? And so that's what we've built here using some BLE technology. And so I'm going to show you what that looks like. So that's Salesforce Authenticator. Also, it should be known, Salesforce Authenticator, you can store all of your traditional top keys there. We've got iconography, so it's very easy to see exactly what you need. If you're a mobile-based user and you need to copy a top key, real simple, just click it. There you go. And so if anybody wants to log into any of my accounts, I suppose all those are active, so there you go. So let's look at what the kind of the alpha version of this looks like for a minute here. So this version allows us to use BLE to signal. So I'm going to go ahead and first create a pairing. So it sees here that I've got my Salesforce Authenticator here. And I'm going to log in, and I'm going to use a super secure password. Please nobody look at it. Bet nobody can guess what that one was. And I'm going to press login. And so here's what's going to happen. You can see I'm instantaneously logged in because it could sense my phone was right there. And it even said right at the top there that there was a login that happened from that identity. Right? So using the BLE connectivity, the Bluetooth signal between the phone and the browser, we're able to constitute the fact that there is a relationship and that there is a second factor there. Now, here's the cool thing. What happens if I decided, oh, you know what, time to use the restroom, I'll grab my phone because I take my phone everywhere, right? Why wouldn't I take it to the restroom? But I'm going to leave my computer there because I only take my computer to the restroom like only 40% of the time, so this is, you got to figure it, right? So I'm going to go ahead and turn this into airplane mode, which is going to deactivate my Bluetooth, and as soon as I do that, what happens? Session's terminated, right? It's relying on that constant signal from the BLE signal, that smell of the BLE, to be able to continually keep that session open. As soon as I've said, I essentially deny that signal to the computer says you're no longer there, I'm going to terminate the session, and that's exactly what it does. So now we've got effectively two new ways, one that exists and one that absolutely does not in GA. I want to be very clear about those forward-looking statements. But the things that we're working on within the mobile identity team are trying to find ways by which we can bring a better experience to security so that we can get more people using that secure solution and actually create a more secure solution as a result of this. So those are the two on the outset demos. And let's go back to the presentation here and talk about the last leg of the stool. All right. So, two people on the field. We've now found a way to enable you and your internal users, your employees, to create a really secure environment for your customers' data. But what, just like when I teach the VC class, what's better than one term sheet? Two term sheets. And what's better than two? Three, or all the term sheets. That would be the other thing. What if we could put one more person on the field, right? What if we could help enable the customer themselves to actually want to protect themselves, right? This is tough. I'm not going to lie. This is a very complicated problem because traditionally, consumers do not believe that security is their responsibility. And if it is, it should not affect their user experience. Now we're starting to talk about things like conversion ratios, right? You don't want to affect somebody's ability to go to a site and then not actually convert. This is a very sensitive topic, so how do you do this? Well, you've got to find ways that make the user experience that much better. So we want to create ways to enable your customers to engage as well. So again, if you think about the typical organization, you've got internal users and external users, and you can think about what the internal deployment of security solutions often feels like, right? If I put a more painful way to log into your SSO every morning in the hand of every one of my employees, most of them will not quit just because I've given them now a more secure but poorer experience, right? However, if you are a commodity customer-facing organization and you are now putting meaningfully more dissonant security procedures in front of them, they will choose and go somewhere else, right? This is a highly sensitive issue. So we need to think about it kind of from the consumerization of security. How does this work? So how do we do this? Well, again, we're going to go back to the premise that two-factor authentication is the single most effective way to add security to an organization. And so how do we do this? We have to empower the customers to protect themselves. So let's look at what kind of the status quo looks like right now, right? Think about a financial institution. How many of you have bank accounts? Okay. I will assume that those who are not raising their hand either have really secure mattresses or are just tired at this point of the day. Completely get it. So username, password, log into your bank. Hey, don't recognize this specific browser. The cookies aren't enabled. The cert's not valid. Whatever it is, here's a TOTP, right? A time-based one-time password. I will text it to you. And we see these all the time, right? Because if you go through your history right now, I guarantee you that at least 17%, potentially 18% of you have somewhere in your iMessage history something that says like, from phone number 7534, and then it says, your password is 7337244, right? And so you now have to manually transcribe that little code and you move it over here. Cool, I understand. I've been there. I've done that. But the fact is, this is not just enabled within financial institutions anymore, right? This is the typical type of two-factor authentication that we're seeing in a lot of consumer-facing enterprises, right? I mean, everybody on this list, great companies, huge brands, incredible value, they're now adding two-factor authentication to their login experiences. But the majority of those experiences are still what they had been traditionally, right? They're not thinking about it from a how do you optimize the consumer, right? And as a result, if you look at the adoption rates of these types of deployments in consumer-facing applications, they're not as high as we would like them to be, right? That's a really polite way of saying they are low, right? But I'm a polite person. That's why they selected me to stand up on stage today. Also, I'm super attractive. That wasn't a joke. Okay, so if we think about the new bar that we have to raise, right? It's not just that there's a user experience versus security paradigm now, but now what our employees will tolerate, we're going to have to create that much more of an interesting user experience for our customers to get them to opt into it, right? So we typically say, treat your employees like your customers, because when it comes to the customer experience, that is the thing that we're always trying to optimize, right? You hear about customer experience, customer X, right? CX, customer experience. We don't usually hear about how do you define the employee experience, and we should. And to be fair, like at Salesforce, we actually talk about it a whole lot. But when it comes to how we are engaging with our external-facing resources, how we interact with our customers, it's incredibly important. And so, click, click, click. We've done some analysis. We know how people are interacting, right? We have this understanding that the majority of the population is now what we'd call mobile first, right? They're not necessarily grabbing their laptops and trying to log in via a browser, especially when it comes to after hours or how a consumer behaves. I'm not saying that business users don't use laptops. That's not what I'm saying. But when it comes to how a consumer interacts with those enterprises and applications, it is typically a mobile-driven environment. And if you look at how users spend their time in mobile, it is not hugely in the business application. It is in social media, it's entertainment, it's music, it's things that are going to be very gravitationally engaged with how to optimize a user experience. So what we've tried to do is think about how can we improve a security posture that actually plays to a customer in the same way they would expect to be serviced in that environment. And so what we've done is we create this thing called, well, we call it MFI, or MIFI. We've never called it that. But mobile first identity, this idea, how do we deploy and think about how to identify and secure an individual or an organization or a community in a way that is a naturally driven mobile first initiative. And so what we've done is we open more channels to verify identity. And I'll show you specifically what we've done with Facebook Messenger in this regard. And we try and create environments that don't really rely on passwords anymore, right? We know that the all-powerful password, my voice does sound kind of booming in this environment, but that all-powerful password is not the thing we want to go to anymore. That's not the arrow in the quiver we want to grab, right? We want to find something else that's more powerful, that's easier to use. And so let's see what that looks like. So I've got a community here that I borrowed from a good friend and colleague of mine named Itzik. So when I type in the word Itzik here, because it's set up for him. All right, so here's Fix Coffee, consumer-facing site. Maybe you want to log in and talk about how much you love your cup of joe. Maybe you want to talk about those really special beans that were fully digested by a pig, excreted, and you've crushed them up for your daily, I don't know, I have a Keurig, so I wouldn't know. But if I choose to log into this, it would say, give me an email or phone number. I'm going to log in with Itzik's ID here, and I'm also just going to verify that my phone is in fact working. There we go. And so I'm going to go ahead and log in. Again, just a username, and it gives me a choice. How do I want to be contacted? I want to confirm the identity, right? So how am I going to do that? I can choose from any one of these, but I'm going to choose Facebook Messenger right now. And with this, I'm now going to have the opportunity to be challenged in a way that actually works for me as a consumer, right? So I now have the ability to double check here, open my phone up, and should have been challenged. Let's see here. Not yet. One more time? Oh, I'm still in airplane mode. Okay, that's good. So the demo is working exactly as it should be. That's wonderful. So let's go ahead and just go back here for a second. And let's get out of airplane mode. It's the little things, isn't it? All right, so let's try and log in again. I'm not going to give you the talk track here. I'm just going to say, here's Itzik. I'm going to go ahead. Oh, there, it actually came through, right? Okay, but I'm going to go ahead and deny that one because there's no reason to approve something that I've just canceled. So deny that. Okay, cool. But again, the idea here is we're now opening a new channel. So type in the username. I don't have to worry about a password. What I'm looking for here now is an experience that allows me to use a traditional channel that is something that I would use to communicate any other way, right? I don't have to remember a password. But I want to understand this from the standpoint of, look, hey, Itzik, tap to approve the request to log into GetFix. And all I have to do is press approve or deny. I don't have to transcribe a code. I get something that's essentially an out-of-band experience. You can't capture this. It's not middleman type of material here. So if I want to go ahead and press approve, I press approve, that a signal will go back, and it will allow me to then log in as the username that's been attributed to that specific environment. So again, how can we engage the customer in a meaningful way that they're used to, right? We're not asking them to memorize passwords anymore. We're not asking them to manually transcribe a one-time password from this screen to this screen. We're just saying, hey, here's a conversation. Is this something you want to do, yes or no? Tap yes, and you can even do this at the outset without even having to go into the application itself. Just as the notification screen, you can just give it a little thumbs up, and that'll also let you in, right? So this is the thing that we're working on, or these more specifically, these are the things that we are working on here that will enable a better user experience that engages more security. We're talking about out-of-band technologies as opposed to traditionally in-band technologies in ways that are highly discoverable. That Facebook Messenger thing, it does not involve a user having to go out and download a new application, right? This is just something that, generally speaking, is already going to be sitting on that person's environment. So it's just a traditional channel that we can now enroll in. So what were the three things that we wanted to talk about? We want to talk about how you can enable yourselves to provide better security to your customers. We wanted to provide ways by which you could induce and enable your employees to provide a better level of security to the customer data. And we wanted to help you find ways so that you could help your customers protect their orgs as well, right? And this is what we focused on. excuse me. Hopefully, I was able to articulate those things relatively well, because the idea here is to give you an unfair advantage, right? There's no reason not to go ahead and turn these things on today. They are free. They're easy to turn in. It's one permission set that you have to enable. It takes less than 2 minutes. You can deploy it from a profile standpoint across your org very, very simply, or you can just enable it for sysadmins if you wanted to start just to test it out. But we feel that it is better to give you the advantage to put 3 people on the field to 10 goal, when a lot of other places are only going to give you potentially 1, and maybe that 1 is just going to be a password or some sort of older version of two-factor authentication, right? And again, two-factor authentication, not the only thing you get to work with here, right? There's all sorts of other groups within the infrastructure teams and the app cloud that are giving you all sorts of new ways to secure your org. And again, that's what we're here for. So thank you very much. I really appreciate your time. I've got a few more minutes for questions, so if anybody has questions, I just ask you go to the mic so that we can record these questions. Thank you very much. Have a great rest of your Trailhead DX, and thank you again. All right, yes, sir.
Yeah, question on, so the first demo was a two-factor password and then approval on the Authenticator app.
That's correct.
The last one that you did was really just a username, like an email address.
Right.
And then an approve on Messenger. Is that still considered two-factor?
It is still two-factor in the fact that you have to know what the email address is. It's not necessarily that much of a secret, but if you knew the email address, that's kind of the thing you know, and then the thing you have is still having to respond with that. So yes, I could also see that how you'd say, well, without the password, is it maybe like 1.5 factors? But the point of it is, more specifically, that it is more secure than just using a password and potentially easier to use than just using a password. And therein lies, I think, the value, right? More security, easier to use. Great question, though. Thank you very much. Yes, ma'am.
So that second one that you did,
yes.
Kind of same question. Do you think during the development process you were going to let customers maybe choose how to get that second factor authentication, whether it's Facebook Messenger, or whether it's a text message, or whether it's whatever?
Absolutely. And in fact, that's something that you can even choose today. If you were going to the administrative settings within your org, you have the ability to turn on two-factor authentication in Salesforce Authenticator, or using a top P, or turning on U2F. There's all sorts of there's a whole menu, effectively, of two-factor authentication solutions. And so you can customize those, and you can choose which ones fit your needs and roles the best way possible.
Right, but going forward, you went to Facebook Messenger. That's what you selected. Do you think it'll be customers can choose, like, you know what, I don't have Facebook Messenger, I don't want to send it to that, which most people do.
Yes.
But I would rather have a text message
yes.
or something like that.
If we're talking about long-term roadmap, then absolutely, right? Because the idea behind how you optimize security for users is you let them essentially define what their roadmap is. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay,
that's
cool.
right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great. Yes, sir.
Yeah, if I have an identity provider turned on in my org for a corporate security perspective, how would the two-factor work?
So you're saying you have an IDP for your org?
Correct.
And so Salesforce is in fact an SP, a service provider within your kind of IDP environment. You can enable this as an org level system. So even within the broader scope of your SSO environment, you could have this specifically turned on just for Salesforce. If Salesforce is in fact not your IDP, you can't necessarily enable the Salesforce Authenticator to authenticate all of the applications that are connected to your IDP. But you can enable this as a specific authentication mechanism for the SP specifically.
Okay, let me be a bit more clarify. Salesforce is integrating with my company's identity provider.
Okay.
So in that case, how would that work?
I think this is a great question, but I'd say the specificity of your question, if you want to just shoot me an email at josh@salesforce.com, I or one of my other sister, or not brother, sister, but some of the other PMs on the team could walk you through specifically if it's possible and how to do it.
Correct, okay.
Absolutely. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. If you take the mic. Sure.
So far what we've been seeing when we talk about two-factor authentication is mainly like something you have and something you know.
Correct.
What happens to the something you are? Is that like anything that, like, is there like anything in the roadmap to introduce biometric authentication or third factors to the Salesforce?
Absolutely. That is a great question. So when it comes to Lightning Login, you're going to need to use essentially the biometric that is embedded within the mobile device, because we're essentially getting rid of the password. So what we're saying is that you have to respond essentially as the first factor is the thing you have, which is this mobile device. But to be able to actually approve that message, you're going to have to demonstrate that you are the person who would be responsible for that phone. And so whether that's using, and Apple makes it pretty easy, because if you have an X, then you're going to be using facial recognition. If you have anything less than an X, it's going to be fingerprint. And if you have anything that's less than, then you're going to be essentially given a PIN. So yes. We're always looking for ways to make it easier and always looking for ways to make it better, right? So it's not just along the y-axis, but it's also the x-axis. So the thing you are, it's usually governed by the resources available in that mobile device, right? You know, like would love to do things like, well, how I move might be different than how somebody else moves, but what's captured in the accelerometer might be difficult to discern. So I think long-winded version of your, why answer in 40 words when you can answer it in 800? Yes? Great, yeah, absolutely. Yes, sir.
So in the location-based, authentication-based in the Lightning Authenticator app,
yes.
What other factors are considered in that? Because I might be sitting at my desk at my work,
yes,
and someone in India is submitting the username and password because they had some sort of malware attack or something like that.
Right. Great question. In order for an automated response, and I want to be very clear, automation is something you can turn on and something you can turn off. So again, from an org level perm standpoint, you get to control that. But if you're so eager to use automation, the way that it works is essentially it has to be the same user, so username, password, doing the same action from the same web service, from what effectively can be described as the same computer. And we just gave you kind of a friendly name, but we're really defining like specifically what that, not what that browser is, but that browser specifically. So
all the way down to like MAC address?
Good. If you want to know like the all the way down, send me an email so I can take a look to know all the different features we use. But it's more than just it's Chrome or it's a Mac. But we're really defining it as that request. And so in that case, like the way you'd try and break that would be, well, you have a man in the browser attack sitting there knowing, and granted, like there's no such thing as a perfect security solution, but we're going to try and optimize around it. And if you already have a man in the browser attack going on, then
you're toast anyway.
Right.
Perfect.
Yeah. Good question. Thank you. All right. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
You showed the second version of Authenticator, right?
Yes.
Is it going to replace the current Authenticator, or it's going to be an add-on to the current Authenticator?
Our vision of how that BLE type of interface would work would be additional functionality built into the flagship version.
Okay, because in that case, will it captures like whether you authenticated using the second version under login history?
So within our login verification history, or login verification, we can tell you, yes, how you logged in, and it might not be available to your logs immediately, but something that we would clearly want to work on is be able to essentially define and monitor the specific feature that triggered that automation.
Okay, so I have one last question.
Yeah, hit me. Not physically. You seem intimidating.
Okay, if you enable high assurance, for example, if I want to export and report,
right.
I enable two-factor authenticator.
Yes.
And if I'm started using the second version of your two-factor authentication, how it works?
So it's a great question. We're still talking about vision now, like how, if I wanted to do this. I think more than anything else, the kind of BLE demo should not be thought of this kind of independent thing, but it's now an additional layer of context that we can know about this specific situation. So same user, same web service, location is kind of from a global standpoint accurate, but we can also now effectively confirm that you're within a few feet from this computer as well, right? So it's just additional security, additional assurance that's provided in that specific instance.
Okay.
Great question, absolutely. All right, I think that probably does it for the questions to the mic. I've got 1 minute, 6 seconds left, so if anybody would love to accost me on my way out, I'm more than happy to answer anything. Otherwise, again, thank you so much and have a great rest of your Trailhead DX.